The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to the disciples, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you'll be liable to the council. And if you say 'you fool,' you'll be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on your way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You've heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard it said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one." The gospel of the Lord. Well, last week's reading was concerned with Jesus saying that he hasn't come to destroy the law and the prophets, the Torah and the prophets, but rather he's come to fulfill them. Here in this week, he continues that. We're still in the Sermon on the Mount portion of Matthew. And he goes on to say, not only is the actual deed of the teachings of the Lord, the prohibitions against murder, adultery, bearing false witness, not only against the act, but against the intention to do such thing, the spiritual motivation to do such thing. He says that you've heard it said that those in ancient times were told not to murder, and if they did murder, they'd be liable to the judgment. But he goes on, he pushes it farther, and he says, but if you're even angry with a sister or a brother, you will still be liable to the same judgment. And if you even insult your brother or sister, you'll be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you'll be liable to the hell of fire. He's not only talking about physical murder here, but he goes on to say, if you call someone, you insult someone, you call them rakah, Aramaic, and the Aramaic phrase just means empty-headed, then you're assaulting their self-esteem. You're murdering their own self-esteem. And if you call someone a fool, well, then you're assaulting their reputation in the community. So murder and violence aren't simply against the body, but against the emotions, against the psyche, against even your reputation. someone else's reputation in the community. To assault any of those is to make you liable to judgment, the body. The self-esteem, you're liable to the council. It's talking about the Sanhedrin, talking about those who have spiritual authority. If you assault their community, their reputation in the community, he says you'll be liable to the hell of fire. Okay, let's pause. He's not talking about eternal damnation here. Yes. We all want to talk about that, about the everlasting torment that follows after sinners. It's not what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about, when he says the hell of fire, he's talking about a place on the southeastern section of Jerusalem, outside the walls of Jerusalem, which was a garbage dump. There had been carcasses thrown out there. There had been all kinds of refuse thrown out there. And of course, as organic material decays, it begins to let off methane. That's why in another place, Jesus talks about this place, which is Gehenna in Greek. In Gehenna, the fire never dies and the worm never sleeps. Well, that sounds like any garbage dump that we know about. You go to a garbage dump and you can smell the methane. And there are usually fires lit there that burn off that methane. And the worm is constantly feeding on this rotting vegetation. We've always defined hell as the place where we're separated from God. And yet the psalmist says, even if I make my bed in hell, you, O God, are with me. Well, that doesn't fit our definition, does it? Rather, the psalmist is saying, even if I make my bed in a garbage dump, you're there with me. That's good news for us. So it's not eternal damnation we're talking about. It's rather being proven to be worthless oneself and thrown into a garbage dump. So he goes on then, and he says, don't let your argument be taken before a magistrate. He says, if you're on your way to court, come to terms quickly with your accuser. You reconcile yourself to the accuser. Don't leave it up to the judge, because the judge is going to take the side of the law. And if you owe something to this accuser, then you're going to be thrown into prison, handed to the guard, thrown into prison. And he says, you won't come out of there until you've paid the last penny. Okay, penny is the translation of it. It's basically the coin they were referring to was 1/64th of a denarius, and a denarius was a day's wage. So even this fragment of a coin, even if you owe that, you won't get out. The point is, you make peace. Don't go to someone else. Don't go to a judge or a court. Don't go to somebody else. You make peace. He'll come back to that in a second. But then he goes on, and he's talking again about more than the act. You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, again, he's not nullifying what was said before, because he means it. Don't commit adultery. But I say to you that anyone who looks at a woman with adultery in his heart has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It's intentions. It's spiritual transgressions. He said, if your eye has looked at a woman, at a person, and has lusted for them, well, he says you'd be better to pluck it out and throw it away. Better to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Again, to be thrown to the garbage dump. Better to go through life maimed, he says in another place, than to go completely and wholly into the refuse. Or if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Throw it away, because it's better to lose one of the members than for you to lose your whole body into the garbage dump. There was a theologian in the early church named Origen, and he had taken this very seriously. He was concerned about adultery and his own lustfulness. And so, to prevent it, he actually undertook an operation on himself. It wasn't cutting off his eye or his hand, it was removing the very instrument of adultery. Yeah, that was taking it a little far. Uh, Thomas Merton, he calls it the reckless act. But it came from a good place, wanting to be faithful to the commandments of the Lord. But Jesus is saying, even your lustfulness in your heart is actually tantamount to the act itself. He goes on, but it was also said that whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I'm telling you, what I say to you, that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. In Jesus' own time, there's a Rabbi Hillel. Hillel was a little more liberal in the discussion of adultery. And he said adultery was fine as long as the woman had been displeasing in any way, in her actions, in her whatever. Basically, that there was, any reason was good for divorce. The more conservative Rabbi Shammai said, nope, it has to be adultery, unchastity, and that alone. So Jesus is actually siding with the more conservative viewpoint of the day, but his whole point is, if you're going to live under the law, you'd better stick to the whole law. The time in which Jesus was living, there were all kinds of ways against or ways to avoid certain of the prescriptions of the law. You weren't supposed to travel away from your house on the Sabbath day. And yet they found a way to circumvent that law by saying, well, and yet my farm is part of my household, and my brothers and sisters' house is a part of the same family household, so I can travel over there. In effect, the teachings of the Torah had come to mean nothing. They found a way to circumvent it. Jesus is saying, not only can you not circumvent these teachings of the Lord, it's harder than you think. You may be able to avoid adultery, but can you avoid lust? You may be able to avoid physical murder, but can you avoid insulting someone? And besides that, simply a certificate of divorce? The whole problem there is the treatment of women in the ancient world. Jesus was saying, your wife isn't property. You can't simply say, here's a piece of paper and it's got everything filled out there and now go on your way. No, he says, it's not that easy. So if you divorce, you're causing your wife to commit adultery, he says. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So many of us, myself included, have suffered divorce. We've gone through it and we found happiness again. Me being married to Nicole was the best thing that ever happened to me. Nicole had been married before. I had been married before. Did we, in fact, commit adultery according to the law? Yes, Jesus tells us right here. But that's why Luther says that we are at once sinner and saint. Because according to the law, we are all sinners. According to grace, we've been forgiven for everything, and we're saints. Because of us, we're sinful. Because of Christ, we've been bought back from that. Because of Christ, we are saints. And so let your word be true. Speak truly. Because he says, again, you've heard it said of ancient times that you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, don't swear at all, either by heaven, because it's the throne of God, or by earth, because it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great king. And don't swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Obviously, before the days of hair coloring. Some of us can't even control whether or not we have hair at all. But Jesus is saying, don't rely on vows. Anytime you hear somebody say, oh, I swear to God, don't believe them. Or when somebody says, trust me, nope. Jesus says, be an honest person so that all you have to say is yes or no, because anything else comes from the evil one. Is he talking about Satan? Is he talking about the devil? I don't see it that way. I think he's talking about the evil one inside of me. That if I have to fortify my words with some kind of half-baked vow, then it must be coming from a life of deceit and falsehood. But if my life is honest, if I live a life of integrity, thanks to God, then I don't have to rely on those things. When I rely on myself, I have to reinforce even my own words because I'm so fallible. But when we rely on Christ, when we have had a change in our heart and in our minds, then all we have to say is yes or no, because the truth is in us. Powerful words that Jesus gives us, proving to us that if we're going to do the law at all, we have to do all of the law, but we can't. That's why he said last week's reading that our righteousness has to be better than the scribes and the Pharisees. And they thought they did the law perfectly. And everyone else did too. But we find out here we can't do the law. Paul talks about that in Galatians. He says that the law was a schoolmaster for us. It taught us that we can't do it. And so thanks be to God, there's grace. Again, on our own, we're terrible sinners. With Christ, we have been made justified. We are saints. And thanks be to God for that.